The late July sun shimmered over the backyard like a thin sheet of heat glass, rippling just above the lawn. The air smelled of grilled corn, cedar smoke, and tangy barbecue sauce, thick with summer laughter and the familiar cadence of overlapping voices. Aunts passed around paper plates heaped with food, kids chased each other barefoot around the garden, and old folding chairs creaked under the weight of family stories retold for the 100th time. It was one of those family gatherings that felt timeless, part ritual, part chaos. Matthew stood by the edge of the deck, a sweating glass of iced tea in his hand, watching the grill flare with orange licks of fire as his uncle poked at the ribs. He hadn't seen most of these relatives since Christmas. Maybe not even then. It all blurred together, holidays, catch-ups, polite questions about work. And then there was Jordan, his cousin, technically second cousin, but everyone just said cousin for ease. Jordan was older by 2 years, quieter, steadier. The kind of guy who always wore soft cotton t-shirts and solid colors, always smelled faintly of pine and mint, and seemed comfortable in silence. He'd always been like that, even when they were kids, understated but impossible to ignore. And this summer, Jordan looked different. Or maybe Matthew was just seeing him differently. They hadn't talked much yet, a brief hug earlier, a smile. Jordan's hands lingering just a second longer on Matthew's shoulder than expected. Just enough for Matthew to feel the warmth. Now Jordan was sitting at the edge of the lawn, half shaded by the old elm tree, long legs stretched out in the grass, a beer balanced casually in one hand. He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching the younger cousins wrestle near the hammock, a small amused crease at the corner of his mouth. Matthew tried not to look, but his eyes kept drifting back. His aunt's voice pulled him momentarily from his thoughts, asking about work, about dating. He laughed off the question like always, gave a vague answer. But inside, something was shifting. Something slow and quiet. Like the way dusk begins without you noticing. And suddenly the world is painted in cooler light. Later, after most of the family had eaten and the sun had started to dip behind the trees, Matthew wandered toward the far end of the yard where the old garden shed stood leaning against time. He wanted a moment of quiet. The voices had started to blur, and the sticky heat had settled against his skin like a second shirt. He hadn't expected Jordan to follow, but there he was. Leaning against the side of the shed, arms folded, the bottle of beer hanging loosely from one hand. The soft, amber glow of the porch lights in the distance cast his face in bronze shadows. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not dramatic, not loud, just a breath held too long. "I needed to get out of the noise," Matthew said, voice low. Jordan nodded. "Same." They stood in silence for a moment, the warm hum of cicadas buzzing somewhere in the dark green. A faint breeze moved through the leaves, enough to stir the hairs on Matthew's forearms. And then Jordan spoke softly. "You look different." Matthew blinked. "Different how?" Jordan shrugged. "I don't know. Older, more grounded." Matthew laughed under his breath. "That makes one of us." The corner of Jordan's mouth lifted again. "I didn't mean it in a bad way." There was a long pause, and then Jordan looked at him. Really looked at him, and something in that gaze made Matthew's throat tighten. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't innocent either. It was curious, restrained, magnetic. "Can I ask you something?" Jordan's voice was quieter now. Matthew nodded. "Did something shift between us?" The question was like a crack of thunder in the quiet, though it came as softly as a leaf falling. Matthew felt the heat rush to his chest, then his face. He opened his mouth to speak. But nothing came out at first. He tried again, voice dry. Yeah, I think it did. Jordan nodded once, eyes still on his, unwavering. I thought I imagined it. No, Matthew said. His heart was a fist in his chest, tight and trembling. You didn't. Jordan took a slow step forward, not closing the space fully, just enough to make the air feel denser, more charged. Matthew felt the heat coming off him, the subtle electricity that hummed between them now, alive and undeniable. There were no sudden movements, no dramatic confessions, just the slow build of something that had always been there, buried, unspoken, waiting for the right summer night to rise to the surface. Jordan's hand brushed Matthew's as he handed over his beer, and even that small contact sent a ripple of heat across Matthew's skin. A shiver climbed up his spine, though the air was still warm. Their fingers lingered. Neither of them spoke. And then, slowly, Jordan's thumb grazed over Matthew's knuckles. Barely a touch. More suggestion than contact, but enough to make Matthew's breath hitch. You feel it too, Jordan said. It wasn't a question. Matthew didn't answer, not with words. But the way he looked back, the way he didn't pull away, said everything. His breath was shallow, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. Jordan's eyes dropped to his lips for the briefest moment, then back up. I shouldn't, he murmured. I know, Matthew whispered. But neither of them moved. The sky behind them darkened into shades of blue and violet, fireflies flickering lazily near the fence line. The party noise faded into a distant murmur. And there, in the half-shadow by the garden shed, the two of them stood suspended, between past and future, between fear and longing, on the edge of something neither had planned for, but both had secretly imagined. And the moment stretched, fragile and taut, like the last breath before a kiss. Neither of them said a word as they turned away from the house and began walking along the outer edge of the property. Past the shed, past the worn picnic table where plastic cups lay abandoned and laughter still drifted from behind the trees. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was full, saturated, as if each breath held things that couldn't yet be said. Matthew's heart thudded with every step. He could feel the warmth of Jordan's body beside him, close but not touching. The nearness was dizzying. Each subtle glance, each shift in breath between them, was like a match head dragging across stone, always close to sparking. They stopped near the old swing set, now half-rusted and overgrown with vines. No one used it anymore. Not for years. The perfect place to vanish into the shadows of childhood without being seen. Jordan sat first, leaning back on the grass, elbows behind him, eyes lifted to the darkening sky. Matthew sat beside him, cross-legged, knees brushing the edge of Jordan's thigh. He could feel the press of that touch, that small point of heat where their bodies made contact. You remember the last time we were here? Jordan asked softly. Matthew swallowed. With the sparklers? You lit one in your mouth and scared the hell out of me. Jordan laughed, quiet and low. You shoved me into the sprinkler, said it was for my own good. It was, Matthew murmured, a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. You were always reckless. Jordan turned his head toward him, and the laughter faded into something heavier. Not always. The silence returned, not empty, not uncomfortable, thick like summer air just before a storm. And then Jordan's voice dropped lower, more deliberate. Tell me something honest. Matthew glanced over, pulse stuttering. What kind of something? Something you've never said out loud before. The question landed like a stone in his chest. He didn't answer at first, just stared down at his hands resting in the grass, fingers curling around a single blade. "I think I've always noticed you," Matthew said, barely above a whisper, even when I didn't understand what I was noticing. Jordan didn't respond, just breathed out, slow and deep. The kind of breath that carries weight. "That night," he said, "at our aunt's lake cabin, when we shared that room, you were asleep, but you rolled over and wrapped your arm around me." Matthew looked at him, his face going hot. "I didn't know I did that." "I know," Jordan said, "but I didn't move. I didn't want to." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world receded. No party, no noise, just the grass beneath them, the stars above, and the slow, magnetic pull of two people finally letting go of the weight between them. Matthew reached out slowly, his fingers brushing Jordan's forearm. Barely a touch, soft as breath. He could feel the warmth of his skin, the fine hairs rising at the contact. Jordan turned his arm over, offering his hand. Their fingers laced together, like it had always meant to happen that way. The sensation was electric, delicate and deliberate. Matthew's whole body reacted, his shoulders tightening, his throat going dry, a thrum building in his chest that felt like music just below the surface. "You're shaking," Jordan said quietly, looking down at their joined hands. "I know," Matthew replied. "I don't know what this is, or if it even makes sense, but I—" Jordan leaned forward, cutting the words short. Not with his mouth, not yet, but with proximity. Close enough that Matthew could feel the whisper of his breath, the weight of his presence. The stillness between them became deafening, the kind that begs to be broken slowly. "You don't have to explain it," Jordan whispered. "I feel it too." Matthew's eyes closed for half a second, overwhelmed by the moment. When he opened them again, Jordan was still there, unmoved, waiting, offering nothing but presence and the space to choose. And Matthew chose. He leaned in, cautious at first, uncertain. Their lips didn't meet immediately. Instead, it was a graze, a ghost of a kiss. Barely there, but enough to send heat cascading down his spine. Jordan exhaled sharply, and then he closed the distance. Their mouths met, tentative, slow, full of wonder and held-back need. Not desperate, not rushed, just long-delayed, quietly seismic. Matthew felt the world tilt. His hand slid up Jordan's arm, resting lightly at his shoulder, anchoring him. Jordan pulled him closer with their joined hands, fingers tightening, hearts racing. When they finally pulled apart, the space between their faces was barely an inch. Their breaths mingled. Jordan's forehead rested gently against Matthew's. "I've wanted that for a long time," Jordan admitted, voice roughened by emotion. Matthew nodded, speechless, trembling, every nerve alight. Behind them, a burst of laughter from the barbecue reminded them of the world waiting just steps away, of names, of expectations, of everything they hadn't said. But here, in this cocoon of dusk and shadow and truth, none of that mattered. Not yet. Not tonight. They didn't move for a while. Two figures nestled in the hush of evening, the warmth of their kiss still suspended in the thick summer air. The world kept spinning just yards away. The soft clink of dishes, the sharp pop of beer tabs, voices rising and falling in that familiar family rhythm. But here, in this overgrown corner of the yard, time had slowed to the gentle pulse of breath and touch. Matthew leaned back first, his fingers still curled lightly around Jordan's. His chest felt tight, full, but not with fear. It was something else. something that made his skin ache and his thoughts float. "Is this—" he began, then paused, unsure how to finish the sentence. Jordan didn't make him. "It's real," he said simply. "Whatever else it is, it's real." That steadiness in his voice, that same quiet surety Jordan had always carried, washed over Matthew like cool water. And for the first time, the heat inside him wasn't something to be afraid of. It just was, like a fire long kindled, finally catching flame. They sat like that until the sky shifted to ink and the first star blinked through. When the air began to cool and the hum of the party started thinning, Jordan gave his hand a soft squeeze. "Come on," he said, rising slowly. "Let's help clean up before someone starts looking for us." Matthew hesitated only a second before nodding. They didn't speak on the walk back, just brushed shoulders once in the dark, the contact quiet but charged. When they reached the yard, the glow of citronella candles flickered on tables, and someone was passing around leftover cobbler in plastic bowls. A couple of uncles were gathered by the fire pit, poking at it with sticks like boys. The rest of the family had settled into that easy end-of-the-night lull. Matthew slid seamlessly back into the current, grabbing a stack of paper plates and smiling at his aunt's comment about how grown-up he looked. Jordan moved through the space a few steps behind, casual, calm, never far. But their eyes met again and again. Brief glances over serving trays. A lingering look as they passed in front of the cooler. And once, when Jordan reached around Matthew to grab a napkin and his fingers brushed the small of Matthew's back, something electric pulsed between them again. By the time the last lantern had been extinguished and the final cooler dragged onto the porch, most of the family had gone home. A few cars idled at the curb, headlights slicing through the warm dark. Jordan's parents were staying the night inside, but he wasn't. Matthew was about to head in himself when he saw Jordan lingering by the fence, a shadow leaning casually against the wood, just waiting. Matthew's breath caught. Then he veered away from the porch and followed him without thinking. They met again beneath the elm tree, now bathed in soft moonlight. The branches above stirred faintly in the wind, and the scent of grass was damp and cool. "Couldn't sleep," Jordan murmured, barely louder than the breeze. "Me neither," Matthew said. The space between them vanished slowly, like fog melting, and when Jordan reached out again, cupping Matthew's jaw in his palm with a tenderness that made his knees go weak, Matthew didn't flinch. He leaned in, slowly, as if giving Matthew a chance to say no. He didn't. Their kiss this time was deeper, heavier with everything unsaid. Matthew's hands gripped Jordan's waist, feeling the taut heat under his shirt, the solidity of him. Jordan's breath hitched softly, his fingers sliding to the nape of Matthew's neck, holding him there. The kiss stretched, grew, became something no longer safe but necessary. When they finally pulled apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing hard. "I keep telling myself this is a bad idea," Matthew whispered, voice shaking slightly. "But nothing's ever felt like this." Jordan's thumb brushed the side of his face. "Then maybe it's not bad, maybe it's just unexpected." Matthew laughed softly, the sound somewhere between nerves and wonder. "God, what are we doing?" Jordan didn't answer right away. He just looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "I think," he said finally, "we're finding out." And Matthew felt it again, that steady gravity Jordan always carried, that quiet pull that made everything else fall away. In the distance, a dog barked once, and a car door slammed shut. But here, time had slowed again, the night pressed in close. Soft, secret. They stood there in the dark, still holding on, still afraid maybe, but no longer pretending. The following day was washed in gold and silence. The barbecue was over, and the yard bore the signs of it. Folding chairs stacked like worn soldiers along the fence, napkins caught in the hedges like tiny flags of surrender. Inside, the house murmured with distant conversation and the slow clatter of dishes being sorted. But Matthew barely noticed. He was on the upstairs landing, towel in hand, pretending to look for shampoo while his thoughts circled Jordan like moths to flame. They hadn't spoken since last night. Not really. Just that last glance across the dark lawn as they'd parted ways, reluctantly, their hands slipping apart like fabric undone in the dark. Jordan had said nothing, only pressed his forehead briefly to Matthew's before walking toward his car. But that look, that long, lingering look, had said more than any words could. It had said, "This is not over," and it wasn't. The hours passed strangely. Matthew moved through the house with the ghost of Jordan's breath still warm on his skin. His aunt asked him to help fold linens. His little cousin begged him for help with a puzzle. And through it all, he kept catching flashes of memory. Jordan's hand on his waist, the weight of their kiss, the soft, guttural sound Jordan made when he pulled him closer in the dark. It was late afternoon when Jordan returned. Matthew heard his voice first, floating in from the porch, low and casual, talking to one of the older uncles. But it hit Matthew like a sudden gust of wind. That voice. That presence. He looked out from the window upstairs and saw him. Gray t-shirt, dusty jeans, head tilted slightly as he laughed at something. Sunlight made his hair gleam. Matthew didn't think. He went down, heart hammering, and slipped quietly out the side door. The shed still stood where it had the night before. Draped in shadows now, the sun tucked behind a line of trees. He waited there, pressed to the wood, hands trembling slightly. Jordan found him 5 minutes later. "I hoped you'd be here," he said softly. Matthew didn't turn. "I wasn't sure if you'd come back." "Neither was I," Jordan admitted. "But I couldn't stay away." The silence between them grew taut again, electric, trembling with possibility. And then Matthew turned to face him. Jordan stepped forward slowly, as if afraid too sudden a movement might shatter the fragile thread stretched between them. He reached out, brushing Matthew's wrist with the back of his fingers. A shiver danced along Matthew's skin. "I haven't stopped thinking about you," Jordan said, "even before last night." Matthew's eyes searched his. "Since when?" Jordan looked away, exhaled. "Since forever, maybe. Since we were teenagers. But it was different then, just something I couldn't name." Matthew nodded slowly. "Me too. I thought it would go away." Jordan gave a soft, rueful smile. It didn't. The wind stirred again, carrying with it the scent of cut grass and sun-warmed wood. Jordan's fingers found Matthew's, tentative at first, then stronger, more certain. "I don't want to hide from this," he said. Matthew stared at their hands. Fitting together so naturally it hurt, neither do I. Their second kiss of the day was slower, more deliberate. It was the kind of kiss that asked permission while simultaneously daring the world to object. Jordan's lips were warm and sure. And Matthew found himself leaning into the kiss with a hunger he hadn't known he carried. Jordan's hand slid to his hips. Matthew's fingers curled into the fabric of Jordan's shirt, pulling him closer. The heat between them built in steady, pulsing waves. Never rushed, never frantic. Just a deepening thrum of shared breath and deep, dangerous knowing. When they pulled apart, foreheads pressed together again, their chests rose and fell in matching rhythm. "This is going to change everything," Matthew whispered. "I know," Jordan replied, "but maybe that's okay." "People won't understand." Jordan nodded. "They don't have to. Just you, just me." Matthew closed his eyes, letting the weight of Jordan's words sink in. It was terrifying, and it was real. Behind them, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fence line. Distant voices filtered through the trees, but none of it felt immediate. Not now. Not here. "I want more than just this," Jordan said, his thumb brushing Matthew's cheek. "I want to figure this out with you." Matthew opened his eyes, and the look he gave was clear. "So do I." And for the first time, the fear inside him didn't feel like something to run from. It felt like something to walk through together. Evening settled in with a hush, the kind that blankets a house after a long, sun-washed day. Inside, voices were softer now. Fewer people, gentler movements. The kind of quiet that came once the stories had been told and the food packed away. Lamps glowed in the windows, casting warm halos against the dark. Matthew sat on the porch steps, arms resting on his knees, the wood still faintly warm beneath him. A cricket chirped nearby, a dog barked twice in the distance. Every sound felt sharper now, every breath. Jordan joined him without a word. He sat close enough that their arms brushed, but not close enough to alarm anyone who might glance out the window. The space between them was intimate in a way that required no touch. For a while, they just sat, breathing the same air, listening. "I used to think I was good at keeping things to myself," Matthew said finally, his voice low, a murmur for the dark. "But being near you now, it's like it's all unraveling." Jordan's head turned, gaze steady. "Maybe you weren't meant to keep it in." Matthew exhaled. "I spent years trying not to look too long, not to feel too much. But there's something about you that makes all of that impossible." Jordan was quiet for a beat, then spoke. "I noticed you watching me, even when we were younger. But I didn't know what it meant back then. I just liked it." Matthew turned his face slightly toward him. "You never seemed afraid." "I was," Jordan admitted. "Still am. But the fear feels smaller than it used to." Matthew smiled faintly, gaze flicking to the stars. "You make it feel okay to want something I thought I wasn't supposed to want." Jordan reached out, fingers grazing the back of Matthew's hand where it rested on his knee. Not a full grasp, just enough to spark. "I don't want this to be something we only whisper about," he said. "Not something we bury under guilt." Matthew looked down at their hands. The gesture was so simple, yet it felt seismic. "I don't either," he said. Jordan's thumb stroked lightly across Matthew's knuckle, and Matthew let his fingers unfurl. Their hands met in the quietest of ways, no urgency, just gravity. A light flicked on inside the house. They both froze for a moment, instinctively, before relaxing again. No one came out. No one saw. "We can't keep pretending we're just cousins who get along a little too well," Matthew whispered. Jordan tilted his head. "No. But we also don't have to explain anything until we're ready." Matthew let the words settle inside him. They fit, like truth that had taken its time to arrive. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Jordan said softly, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. "Early, back to work, real life." Matthew's throat tightened. "I figured. But I want to see you again. Properly, not just at family gatherings." Matthew turned to him, eyes shining with something quiet and fierce. You will." They didn't say more after that. There was no need. The silence between them had shifted from tension to something deeper. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. Eventually, they rose and slipped inside. Careful, unspeaking. Jordan said goodnight to his parents and offered a nod to Matthew's mom, who was loading the dishwasher. Everything was ordinary again. Everything looked unchanged. But as Jordan passed Matthew in the hallway, their shoulders brushed, and in that half-second, something passed between them that said, "This is real. This is ours, and we're not going back." Upstairs in the narrow hallway just outside the guest rooms, Jordan turned before stepping into the dark. He looked back at Matthew, and the corners of his mouth lifted. "Sweet dreams," he whispered. Matthew's voice was barely there. "You too." The door closed with a soft click, and Matthew stood in the dark hallway for a long time, his fingers still tingling, his chest full. He knew what had happened between them was more than a kiss under the stars or a secret shared at twilight. It was a shift in gravity, a pull that could no longer be ignored. And somehow, despite the questions and the unknowns, despite what it might mean or how the world might react, he felt peace. Because for once, he hadn't turned away, and neither had Jordan, and that made all the difference.